Hello friend, I hope this finds you well. My name's Chris Thrall. I'm a former Royal Marines Commando and I fought my way back from chronic trauma and addiction to live, work and travel in 80 countries across all 7 continents, achieving all of my dreams and goals along the way. Now I pass my simple system on to other people, but I can only help you if you like and subscribe. So please do so, because you get one life, and if you live it right, one is enough. Alex, how are you, my friend?
Hi, Chris. Yeah, I'm great. Thanks. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's so kind that you agreed to come on at pretty short notice. Although we're not really going anywhere at the moment. What with this lockdown, I saw your story on LinkedIn. I immediately remembered. Hang on, I've seen this guy doing a TEDx talk, which is impressive in itself. And I remember you saying something about turning adversity or bad experiences into something positive. And that is something massively that I promote, Alex, or I try to promote. I try to get people to adopt the no negatives in life. If you don't turn everything into a positive, you're digging your own, you're digging yourself into the ground. So yes, I don't even know where to start with your resume. Everest, you attempted Everest twice?
2014 and 15. So yeah, 5 years ago now.
You would have been the youngest person to summit. Would I be right?
No, if I'd summited the first year, I would have been the second youngest Briton and the youngest to climb from the south route in Nepal. I was 18 on the first attempt and 19 the following year.
Is Bear Grylls, was he the youngest, or is that?
He was at one point, and Bear was a big inspiration to me, actually, and I'll come on to that, at some point, I'm sure. He was 23 when he summited, but since then, the youngest Briton is now 16 on the north side. I think the youngest on the south side, because there's two different routes to Everest, was 18. So yeah, I think that's still been held, and I'm 24 now, so still, I've lost that age kind of group now. But to be honest, it's never really about that. It was just using my age almost as an advantage to get the funding and get the opportunity in place.
Absolutely amazing, and I can't wait to hear more. I'm an armchair Everest fan, probably like a few people. I met it's Habler, isn't it? Messner's partner, Peter Habler.
Yeah, Peter Habler.
Yeah, I met him in Austria, obviously. No, can't remember the name of the place. It slips my mind. My mate's going to kill me because he lived there for 10 years.
No, Christ.
But so I'm a big Everest fan. I look forward to hearing about that. But you've overcome adversity in your life. Again, we'll touch on that. Can we just start, Alex? Because I get a lot of young people approach me talking about fitness because they want to join the Royal Marines. And I try to get it across to them that it's, to be honest, the Marines are not looking for supermen. They've never have been. They're looking for people that won't give up, which is two different skill sets. But you're a man that's used to not giving up. You've done a lot of ultra running. You've run up just about every single mountain in Britain and every single hilltop as well. What advice can we give these young people?
I think that's a really good point, Chris, is that it really is about the mindset. And I've often said to myself that the engine is only as good as the steering wheel. Somebody once said to me when I was starting off on this Everest journey, passed on a quote that I'd been told to them, was that Everest is 90% mental and only 10% physical. I think you can probably use a similar equation to many things in life. I mean, obviously having the physical fitness is really important for anything, from a marathon even to a 5K to a long walk to a big ultra endurance challenge or something, like the Marines or in the Army. Now, I have no military experience, but I've been on trips and expeditions with a lot of people who have, and the general consensus is that they're both quite similar in that case of, mind over matter. I mean, physically, to take you back, I've never been a naturally sort of strong in that sense. I was never a kind of, a natural athlete or gifted in that sense. I was a bit of an outcast. I was an underdog, still am in many ways. I'm very much built for endurance. I'm very lean, very thin, but put me in a gym and I could barely probably do a press up. But then I've always found my strength in the mountains and running in particular because of my build. And when I was at school, when I was younger, I hated PE. I hated sport. I was the one that came second to last in cross country in PE. And I think partially that was down to mindset and lack of confidence in myself. And I could never have believed that from coming second to last in cross country out of 150 kids, that I'd be coming first in 10Ks and in hill races and fell races, only a few years later. It shows we all have the capability as long as we have the mindset. But I've always quite enjoyed that because in the mountains, in my challenges, people probably see me as some kind of lanky kid, and you can come flying past the guys who are all beefed up and really big and strong and think they can, as you smash the world. But actually, sometimes that creates an expectation that because they've done hours in the gym, because they're super strong, that they can climb Everest, they can do all these things. But that can be quite dangerous. And actually, on Everest and on the other peaks I've climbed, and been on, sometimes the people that have done the best aren't the athletes. It's actually the older ones who are so unflappable. They're very laid back. They maybe haven't done any training or very much training at all, but they have the ability to adapt, to be flexible, and to take care of themselves. And typically my strength I found in sport is in running. I mean, my best distance is probably marathons. Because I've never had the strength or the speed to be at any kind of good level. But I think ultimately what my challenges have taught me is that ability to keep on going has served me much better. And in the mountains, it can be quite satisfying when you're literally, running up hills past all these beefed up guys who can bench press probably me in one arm. But strength has many different forms. And it's quite satisfying that you're able to find the strength out of somewhere, really, and that training the mind will take you a lot further, I've often found.
Definitely. I mean, to add to that, I was the worst runner in my troop in the Marines. I hated it. It was so hard. And yet I ran an ultramarathon a day for 37 days, the length of Britain. And that was considerably easier. So what's changed? Well, I was 50 or I was 48 instead of 18. So it can't be, well, I mean, age has obviously changed, but you wouldn't have thought that had worked to my benefit. Well, obviously the thing that had changed is how I talk to myself, and how you turn, pain into pleasure, I suppose.
Sure.
So,
I think, yeah.
no, go for it.
Well, I was just going to add in there that I think, we have to, it's still important that we put the physical work in. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter how determined you are, you're not going to run a sub-3 marathon if you've not ran. There are obviously limits and there are barriers. However, without the right mindset, the best physical preparation in the world won't get you there. And it's like in the Olympics, people train for years and years and years for one moment. And if the mind gets it wrong, if your mindset is wrong, then you've already set off on the wrong foot.
So the moral of the story is reading a book on mindset is going to see you succeed just as much as hitting the gym or going out for a run.
Even better to actually get out there in the elements and push your bar, stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone, put those, put that mindset in practice. I think is often I think for me, as I'm sure from your own challenges and the ultras, that there's no better teacher than adversity and hard times for building that resilience. And you can teach it, but there's no better way to learn it than actually getting out there and just putting yourself out there a bit more than you used to, I think.
What is your marathon time?
I've ran 3 official marathons. I've run a few in training, on my own, but my best marathon was 2:54.
Whoa! That's incredible.
That was at Chester in 2018. I did London last year, but I'd had an injury, so I lost a few months, and I hit a very bad mental place in that injury time. And I came back, just grateful that I could run. And actually, I ran London for the experience and for the facts I was able to run rather than trying to. I knew I wouldn't be able to beat my PB because I am very much goal and performance driven. So I ran it in a costume instead to make it as a fundraiser. And I think I ran 3:15 in a costume, so I was quite happy with that.
Oh, great. Well, you're almost an hour faster at the marathon than I was not even back in the day. I don't think I ran the London until I was 35 years old. So probably past my peak then, but that is one hell of a good fun day, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It was an experience of a lifetime, and obviously this year's would have been on Sunday coming up, but obviously it's been postponed due to the COVID. Now, because of my own challenge I had coming up, I'd deferred my Good for Age place. I wasn't going to run it this year, but I can completely relate to all the people that have been training and suddenly had their goal just, ruined. But this is where we're in these challenging times. And I think, as you say, with the whole subject of adversity, this is where we have to find the positives. It's okay to feel down, but I think ultimately we have to focus on the things that we can control.
Yeah. Why do you think it is that, as a society, we're just not very good at stuff, are we? We're not very good at instilling the right motivation into our young. We're not very good at, I don't want to say preventing bullying, because it obviously it's something that's coming from the home. So then we're looking at relationship issues or lack of significant role model for that young person. It seems to be like all the work's done on Facebook with a meme. That's good. That's going to sort our young people out.
Good question, and I think I could probably write a book on that alone, trying to work it out, because I'm still looking for the answers, and I don't think it's a quick answer. But I think ultimately, bullying is something that I experienced all my way through school and has had a real profound effect on me, and probably still does now, even though I left school many years ago. And you're right, it does tend to come from deeper within, generally, because that person insecurities and challenges and issues of their own that they're projecting onto other people. And when I look back at that now, I laugh at all the things I used to be called and how much I used to take it seriously, you know, and be affected by that. I'm very grateful I was bullied, because it actually pushed me towards the path that I've taken in life. But I think with society as a whole, I think what we've seen recently, especially with the COVID outbreak, is this sense of fear and anxiety, and people are so materialistic. You know, people's lives are based around, you know, their job, their income, and so many people are surviving rather than thriving. You know, they don't really have a sense of purpose. And people, you know, aren't very resilient naturally, because we are, most of us live in a very comfortable place. You know, we don't have to deal with a lot of hardship. And sometimes when we do that, we can go one or two ways. You know, we can become resilient and more physically and mentally robust, or we can turn to unhealthy ways to cope. And I think all the panic buying we heard about was all a natural response. People being, you know, people responding to fear and uncertainty. And naturally, the outdoors adventure has taught me to think, right, what's the opportunity? How do I make the best of this? Not everybody, of course, can go off to Everest, can be in the army, can have these experiences. But I think, I do think a lot of it is that we are losing connection with ourselves and with each other. Social media is playing a massive role in that. We're getting this constant perception of what we should be doing or what we should be, and this conventional path to life. And I think that I've been lucky that my life events have sent me on a different path from that, by chance. But ultimately, I think at a young age, I had experiences that taught me what really matters. And I think a lot of people are really out of touch with what matters. And hopefully one thing that comes from all this is that we're having time to stop and reflect and realize what's it all about. You know, what we're here to do, what really matters. Is it about, you know, succeeding with the typical tick lists, you know, good job, good house, you know, car, that sort of thing? Or is it about actually trying to be the best we possibly can be and to help each other?
Yes, exactly. It is interesting. I feel incredibly fortunate that I found what I love to do, Alex, you know, and obviously I can do it from home, and I'm doing it now, meeting incredible people like yourself. It would seem, or it seems kind of strange to me now, that there's people that just go to a job and that's when they come back that they're kind of, you know, tapping their fingers on the table because it's uncomfortable. Whereas for me, I've experienced a really nice sense of peace during this lockdown. I think the weather's probably helped, but you know, that's it's always going to be this, you know, the seasons are what they are. So yeah, but let's move on. Let's just talk about the bullying and stuff, because I was asked just the other day by one of the young men that I life coach, how he can deal with the memories of being bullied from school and the effect that the effect it's still having on his life. And my answer was, first of all, turn every negative into a positive. So look for the positive, realize the lessons you can take by not being a bully yourself as you go through life. Secondly, forgive those bullies, because they are victims themselves by definition of the fact they're having to take their inner anxiety out on other people. And by forgiving them and realizing there's nothing wrong with you, what you're doing then is you're taking your marbles back out of their pot, because all the time you've got your marbles in someone else's pot, you're not going to win the marble game of life.
I don't think I can add much to that, really. I think there is that personal acceptance, and forgiveness is really important. When I look back now at the bullies and the things that I was called and how that used to bother me, I almost laugh at how meaningless and how all those comments didn't have any real importance. They were just very childish and were just very typical, you know, kids will be kids behaviour. But at the time, of course, it's a lot harder to see that, especially when you're young and you're very sensitive to these things. I think it's great that we don't become bullies ourselves. That's really important, because there's a whole case of treat people how you'd like to be treated. Always works. But I think what helped me was that in some ways, Everest was a way of proving them wrong and proving me wrong. Proving that actually, I was proud to be different. I wasn't afraid to be different, and that I could prove all these bullies wrong that said I was all these horrible things. But quite quickly, I realised there was nothing more to prove. And I look back, and a lot of those bullies are still where I thought they'd be. Some of them have gone on to achieve, successful paths and careers. Some of them are just doing the bog standard tick box approach to life. And I've been very lucky to build a successful, different, unconventional path, I'd like to think. And it came to me once. I was walking around town in Chester, and one of the people I've been to school with, not necessarily a bully, but one of the kind of bystanders, he just saw me for the first time many years since school, and he said, "You've been busy." And this was after both Everest attempts, and I felt good that all these people that doubted me, and I was this loner with stammer, badly bullied, the one that never really fit in, had kind of gone on to achieve bigger things, where they've kind of followed the beaten track. And I won't lie that there was an element of, wanting to be better than them, because they made me feel so pants. But problem is, if we go through life trying to prove things, trying to prove to other people, we're never going to be happy. We're never going to be satisfied. And once I found that in myself, I was able to do these things just for the personal journey of then the achievements and the experience. And I wish if I could give my advice to my younger self, or anybody younger, it would be that nobody can make you feel bad without your permission. And you've got to really analyze what these people are saying. And does it really have any meaning, or is it just their own insecurity? In which case, unless you take it on board, unless you react to it, it literally physically cannot affect you.
If you're getting bullied, reach out for help. Don't just hide it and put up with it.
Definitely reach for help, because I never got enough help. The school barely did anything. They was powerless to do it. And it got to the point that I started cycling 10 miles to school every day just to avoid the school bus and all the bullies on there. And then I had my tyres slashed, I was spat on, had bottles thrown at me, because then I was singled out. But the positives are is that I started cycling to school, and that got me into cycling. So, there is these positives, but I think all I'd say is you've got to let them go. You can't dwell on them. But I will admit that even today, I'm very, very self-critical. And I think that is largely in part due to being bullied. And it can be hard to shift. But I think sometimes if you're feeling very frustrated or very bad about yourself, you've got to write down all these beliefs that you might be holding. You can just put them on paper and actually just to think about each one and think, where's that coming from? Is there any evidence to prove all these things? There's not.
Yeah, exactly. And also life isn't, it's not a sprint. We're all in it for the long run. And if it takes 20 years to talk yourself into a better place, well, then you've still got, maybe another 50 years left to go once you've got it right. And to me, that's a good deal, that's a really good deal.
It's always a work in progress. I mean, I've left school, 8 years ago nearly, and it still affects me, but it gets easier with time. And I think, just being able to reach for help, to find your own self-worth, that you're not dependent on others. And this is where social media has a negative role, is that we can become dependent on others' approval for our own self-worth. And that's where bullying is also so dangerous. And
social media, I mean, maybe we save that conversation for another day, but it's not even a double-edged sword. It's like a sword that's got 3 bad edges and maybe like one blunt, semi-good edge.
I like that analogy. Yeah.
Awful what we put on our young people as adults, and we just let it happen. We don't question it, and gosh. So if we may, Alex, let's just touch on you mentioned epilepsy. I saw in one of your write-ups, panic attacks, this kind of thing. Can we just you don't have to go deep into it, but I just want to show for our young people listening and our old people, and indeed for myself, the sort of challenges you've the challenges you've used to your advantage, you know, in the long run.
Exactly, because I think, you know, these challenges are exactly that. They can be problems or challenges depending on how we view them. And I've been very lucky. I had a great start in life, and what I've dealt with is nothing compared to some, but our challenges are relative to everybody. And when I was about 9 years old, I was diagnosed with a mild form of epilepsy. Now, I only had a few seizures. You know, I was very lucky that they didn't, you know, they were brought under control quite quickly. I've been seizure free for 14 years now, probably. I'm never really concerned about that coming back. But at the time, it was just a catalyst for a whole host of different challenges. So anxiety and panic attacks all the way through school, where even having a seizure in McDonald's meant that just the smell of fast food could trigger a panic attack. Oh. And that, like, so sensitive to everything around me that whilst growing up, my friends are more interested in girls and football and PlayStation. I was sat there in assemblies, in classes, sort of trying to take deep breaths, trying to stop a panic attack coming on. Very, very much a health hypochondriac, you know, very, very anxious. And yeah, that was really unsettling. The epilepsy when I was younger really kind of made me afraid to get out of the house when my parents weren't there, you know, just because of the fear of having more seizures. And I did go out and about. I did knock around like normal kids, but there was good and bad days. Prior to that, I've had a stammer ever since I've been able to speak. Now, this is the thing that people really don't get is that, you know, nowadays, you know, I'm a speaker. My main job is speaking in public, you know, to companies and to schools. Been speaking now professionally for about 4 or 5 years. But even still today, I can struggle to make a phone call. I can get on a talk, get on a train to speak to 500 people somewhere fluently, and then not be able to ask for a ticket on the way home. But for a long time, I had no control and no confidence over that stammer. So you can imagine, makes school even harder. And to the point that I'd literally smashed up phones at home for the frustration of being able to say my own name, hiding in the toilets because I was terrified of speaking in class and embarrassing myself. And it can be so bad that, you know, you can't say a single word. I really struggle with words beginning with K, which isn't ideal when you're from Kelsall and now live in Kendal. You know, is it really? It couldn't come in much worse, but I think the stammer knows that.
Sounds like a Monty Python sketch or something.
It does, and you have to make fun of it. And then for a long time I did. You know, I had to just treat it as part of me. And it wasn't until about 4 years ago I went on a course called the Starfish Project, which really changed it because I got a new technique. I got better ways of managing it. It's still an everyday challenge. It still holds me back, I'll admit that. But when I realized that I had a gift, I had something to share by speaking, I had to do it. I had to face that fear. And it's led me to where I am.
Alex, what is it that drives the stammer? Is it a sort of mild form of anxiety, or?
There's a bit of mixed science around it and a bit of, you know, mixed beliefs. But I think generally, I think it is an anxiety response. And it's essentially, I've read, it's like mini anxiety attacks in the vocal muscles. Now, a lot of it is experiential. So, for example, I really struggle to thank people or to ask questions because if I stammer on a question or thank you, it's very hard to skip past it. Whereas if you're a covert stammerer, you can almost change words, you can avoid it. I think that's with speaking, is I can rehearse, and I do rehearse all my talks word by word so that I know what's coming and I can avoid the blocks. But it's that case of not wanting to be seen to be rude or ignorant. There's that emotional anxiety. And I think that's when it tends to be bad. It's not just about people say, slow down or take deep breaths or calm down or you're tired or you're stressed. Because in the most stressful, difficult moments in my life, I can be perfectly fluent. And then even just the day-to-day stuff, when I'm very happy and relaxed, I can struggle. So I don't know, but I think at some point I realized that I had to accept it, that it's part of me and it's not going to hold me back. But hey, at school for a long time it did.
Yeah. When I was really bad with my drug addiction, I didn't know what was happening to me because there wasn't kind of medical information like there is these days. These days, you can just Google stuff and, oh, that's what I'm experiencing. So back then, I'm going up to people, or people would pass me, and for some reason, if I needed to speak to them, I'd go, oh, and I'm stammering, and I just couldn't get my words out. And as I couldn't get my words out, my panic is just it's increasing even more. And that's exacerbating the not being able to speak. In some conversations, I just had to go pat the guy on the shoulder, and I had to walk off, really embarrassed.
Oh God, yeah, I know.
Hide on there's, I was 27, trying to be as cool as possible, doorman on a nightclub, and I couldn't speak. It's well, it's good I can laugh about it now. At what point, Alex, did you was there a switch that changed in your head, like a moment of enlightenment between then and obviously deciding that you're going to climb Everest?
It was, and quite a long story really, but I guess in a nutshell it was about 14 years old, discovering the outdoors. And it was by chance, I was invited hill walking with a friend in the Lake District, and prior to that I'd started to sort of sow some seeds where I was on holiday in Turkey with my mum, and prior to that my parents had just kind of they separated just as I started high school, which can in some ways made me grow up a lot faster than I probably would have done. And then on that holiday in Turkey, I decided to try something called paragliding, which is quite an extreme sport. Like, I was never the adventurous sort, so God knows where that urge came from. Mum looked at me like I'd gone mad. But that decision, that control, that case of actually, I'm not going to let this hold me back anymore, that changed my whole mindset from this victim mindset to a victory mindset. And I think that still applies today in various forms of, do I fight or flight? And it is that whole case of, we can't always choose what happens to us in life, but we choose how we respond. And that's still what kind of guides me today, really. And I think that moment, jumping off that hill in Turkey, 7,000 foot, I'd never been so scared in my life. But ultimately, that's what changed everything, because I realized that I could do a lot more than I thought I could, and that I wanted to find what I could overcome next. I was still this really shy, anxious kid. It's still all these challenges were going on, but I found this passion, this confidence that I never had. From then on, I wanted to keep on pushing that, finding out more stuff to do, and then started running, started more outdoor challenges. That hill walk in the Lake District, though, is what probably got me onto the Everest path, because we were walking out in the hills and I was still suffering with anxiety and panic attacks. I remember we went on that hill walk, and that evening I was in the restaurant having a panic attack, But that day in the hills, I remember we were near Blencathra in the North Lakes, and I had this question pop into my head: where is Mount Everest? I didn't know anything about it, didn't even know where it was. And so naturally, you come home, you go on Google, and came across some photos of it, and just straight away became captivated and just fascinated by Everest. So that was the kind of flip the switch moment. But at 14, I never imagined that actually just 4 years later, I'd have been at Everest Base Camp, about to make an attempt for the top. Ultimately, it was this case of deciding that Everest was the biggest thing that I could achieve, the biggest thing that I could overcome, and still proving those bullies wrong. And over those 4 years, I just took the steps to make that goal a reality, really. And the rest, as you say, is history.
How did you get the funding? Because that's what's holding me back as we sit here now. I haven't tried to get any funding, but I have a kind of dream of, you either have the hook of climbing Everest or you don't. And when you have it, I will admit it's an item I've added to my bucket list. I'll come on to that, because I'm also really in two minds about it, because I'm a father and I know climbing Everest is not without its sort of dangers, and some of them you just can't calculate, right?
Sure.
Avalanches, as you well know, or the ice collapsing. But how did you go about raising the money?
Yeah, because again, I had a very typical background. My parents have always given me support in other ways, but they weren't just going to sign me a check. You know, we had a very average but comfortable background, and they were never really outdoorsy themselves. You know, my dad was a runner. He got me into running. I remember, you know, huffing and puffing my way in a 2-mile run just in return for a €2 coin on holiday in France to buy a croissant. But they were never, you know, adventurers or mountaineers. And my dad, being from Yorkshire, said it was a lot of money to spend on a holiday. Because I think partly Everest was kind of 3 different areas. You've got the training, then you've got the funding, and then you've got actually the prior, you know, the kind of prior experience as well. Because it's not just about signing the check, and it's not just about being good in the gym. It's about having a catalogue of high altitude mountaineering behind you, so that you know how you perform at altitude. And that's, well, there is no real shortcuts to that. People do take shortcuts and fortunately give Everest a bad name, but ultimately it's a long process. And I took a very fast track approach. And I think looking back at that, I wish I'd done things differently. But at the time, I started to research other Everest climbers, you know, to find they'd walk the path. And what inspired me the most was that many of them were young. They were 18, 19. They'd had a similar background, but they'd managed to find the funds, you know, without having rich parents like some do. And ultimately, the way to do that was through, you know, it was corporate sponsorship. And I knew nothing about this. You know, I'd done Mont Blanc by this point. I'd been slowly sort of taking conscious steps towards Everest, you know, getting more altitude experience and working in a pub. But obviously, washing dishes in the pub wasn't going to pay for Everest, because typically an Everest expedition, to join, you know, a Western-led, properly guided and fully supported expedition, you're looking about £30,000, maybe even more now. And that's without any prior trips. So there was raising money to go to Nepal for a month to try and climb a 7,000 meter peak. The expedition kit alone cost about £4,000, maybe more, as a rough idea. And then you look at the full cost of the project. You know, there's a lot to it. But ultimately, my mantra was find a way or make one. And corporate sponsorship became a full-time job. You know, I was contacting companies all over the UK day in, day out. Once I finished my A-levels, it became my gap year. To be honest, even while I was doing my A-levels, it was my gap year because it was all I cared about. And then I spent a year just sending emails, literally. Got a sponsorship pitch together, and I won't bore you with the details of that. But ultimately, fundraising became a full-time job. And then when I wasn't sending emails, I was training, or I was working in the restaurant just to pay my keep and, you know, pay my own stuff.
Alex, is the money conditional? I mean, if you decided you weren't going to leave home, do you get to keep it, or have you got to send it back?
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, if a company's giving you, you know, if they're giving you sponsorship, it's a pretty big deal for them. It's a marketing opportunity. It's an acquisition. And again, I had companies giving from sort of £100 up to £10,000. So they're making big investments and big risk. And that's the problem with Everest and getting sponsorship for individuals doing challenges, and why it's so difficult is there's so much risk involved, as I would later find. But ultimately, I mean, if you'd spent the money, then you'd have to go on the trip. But the thing is you're spending the money in advance, because your expedition leader needs to, you know, buy oxygen in advance. You need to buy the permits. The permit alone is about $11,000. These things aren't refundable. And when the expeditions went wrong, as they did, we couldn't get any of that money back because it had already been spent. You're not paying for a kind of a package holiday. And this was the kind of the problem, really, is that it's a different ball game. And that was the frustration for me, is that I'd come back unsuccessful. I couldn't get these companies' banners to the top of the world, and yet I couldn't give them any money back. Oh. I was able to go back at a cheaper cost, because obviously some of those costs could be transferred over. But ultimately, no, you've got to be 100% on it, and find people willing to take the risk.
Yeah, because you've just added an angle there that possibly a lot of people wouldn't consider. It's not just the disappointment of not your dream not coming through and you summit this mountain. It's the fact you've spent all this time and effort to get this incredibly large sum of money together from a difficult source, and like that, you're back to square one.
Oh God, yeah. And maybe that's itself is a barrier to why people don't, chase these big goals, because they're scared of failure. They're afraid of what could go wrong. And if I knew what could go wrong, I would never have started. I was, you could say, very unlucky with what happened. But I could never have predicted or planned for that. And all I could do was adapt to the circumstances as best I possibly could. But there wasn't just the feeling of actually, losing the money in my own effort. Yeah, you can't replace time, but you can go back. It's actually that sense of spending other people's money, that, okay, it was completely out of my hands. It wasn't like I'd gone there completely, completely unprepared and unequipped and done something stupid. But ultimately it was just that sense of helplessness, really. And there is a real emotional low to that, because straight away you're thinking you've spent all that time and effort and training and money and it's just gone. But the mountain doesn't give a damn how hard you've worked, how much you've spent. And you have two responses to that. You can use it to come back stronger. You can take people back on the journey, or you can get to that point in life like many people on the trip did, especially people that were a lot older than me, that kind of wanted to do this for many, many years, and life got in the way and they left that chance. And I think to be willing to achieve something like Everest, you've got to be willing to take the risk and put it on the line. And I was lucky, I was 18, I didn't have responsibilities, wife, kids, all that sort of stuff. Some people took massive financial risks to do that. But I think that commitment is why some people, achieve extraordinary things.
How much was your biggest donation?
£10,000.
Oh, that was a good one to get.
It was, and the thing is, that's the difference, is that it's sponsorship. It's not a donation as such, because it's a two-way relationship. You've got to give them return and value, and it's difficult to do that if you can't get the money shot on the summit of the top of the world. But ultimately, it got coverage in other ways, not for the reason we expected. But yeah, it's a long process, and you've got to be in it for the long haul.
So let's come on to the actual challenge, because wow, it's real boys' own stuff, isn't it? Which side of the mountain did you climb?
In Nepal, so the south side.
Nepal, is that the Hillary Step side? Or?
Yeah, just below the summit you've got the classic bits, and then you've got camps 1 to 4 through the icefall as well.
Is it true the Hillary Step part of it's collapsed, or is that a myth?
I've not been there, seen it for myself, but I've heard that's the case, yeah. Or basically the step or the obstacle that was there has now gone.
Okay. So yeah, so you did the walk in, is it the trek in?
2014, we flew out to Nepal. I was on a team led by Tim Mosdale, who I'd actually climbed with on my very first rock climb in the lakes, because once I had this fascination of Everest, I started speaking to as many people as I could, and I wanted to meet an Everest climber and realised that there were superhumans who'd done it, and actually that I wanted to be like them. And I wanted to be on Tim's team from the start. So luckily, I jumped the hoops that he raised up and he let me on the team. And there was 4 of us going out there with obviously the Sherpas and the wider team. And yeah, we started a 3-week trek from Lukla, that tiny airstrip out in the high mountains. And then from base camp, we would have spent 5 weeks, making a number of acclimatization trips, and there were, they're known as rotations, where you're obviously getting acclimatized to the various altitudes and getting the logistics in place. But then everything had started so well. A day before we got to base camp, there was a massive avalanche in the icefall, which is the section just above base camp. And sadly, 16 climbing Sherpas had been killed, which was the biggest disaster in Everest history at the time. So we got to base camp the next day, and it was a very, very somber mood. It was horrible, really. And obviously we had to sit low and have respect. And there was a period of mourning, for all the Sherpas who obviously all knew each other. And it was, a massive shock. And what happened next was a bit complicated, a long story, but politics and governments got involved, and it just turned very, very messy, and we had no choice but to go home without stepping a single foot on the mountain.
Am I remembering this rightly? Did the Sherpas suddenly say, hang on, we should be getting paid more for this?
A minority used the opportunity to get better payout insurance from the government and the Ministry of Tourism. So they essentially held the mountain to ransom by saying, if anybody climbs, we're going to hurt you or your Sherpas. And it was only a very, very, very few people that, preyed on the emotions of a very tragic situation. And sadly kind of caused, it was change that they deserved and needed. They needed to be better insurance payouts and better care from the government and tourism. But at doing that, they also cost each other massively, because obviously they lost all the tourism, all the people went home.
Yeah.
So it was a really sad situation.
So that was disappointing. How did it come around that you decided to go back?
Well, initially, we can't complain when we're going home safe to our families. But there is that bitterness, there is that resentment. And I think you've always got to take a bit of time to let yourself feel it, let yourself be disappointed, but don't linger on it. Okay. Give yourself a bit of time and then accept it. Right. What can I do about this? And basically I realized I had to go back. I'd come this far. I was all for giving up, but that wasn't the right thing to do. People have given me so much investment, and some of them supported me to go back again, which I was very, very lucky for. I took a year to do more training, having learned, as we mentioned before, that the mindset and the flexibility and building that mental endurance is so key. And I think I'd gone out there without a complete understanding of that, and been quite frustrated at how bad I felt so soon with the altitude. But altitude affects everybody, no matter how young or how fit you are. And I realized it was an opportunity to really work on that, not the altitude, because you can't train for that, but just that mindset and mental resilience. So I did a number of challenges, endurance stuff in the hills and on the bike, just to really test that, to build some to build some momentum. I think just to get that sense of achievement back, to get that buzz that you get at the end of a race or reaching the top of the mountain, which is close to home. Raise some money for the victims and the people in Nepal, and then raised the money again. I went back in 2015.
Wow, that's another thing, isn't it? Is in life, if you focus on giving and not the selfish aspect, the universe seems to give you back more.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So you went back in 17. How?
15. Sorry.
Oh, 15.
Yeah.
And what was the reason you turned back this time?
Well, once again, it was the power of nature and taking things out of our hands. We were on the same team, same format, and we got to base camp and it was fine. And then we were making our first trip up to Camp 1, our first, it was our first kind of rotation. And we were just below Camp 1, about half an hour away. Most of the team were already there when the earthquake hit Nepal. So we were in just at the top of the icefall. We've got out of the kind of the most dangerous part where you've got this, you've got hanging seracs and crevasses. But we're moving into the Western Cwm, which is this massive valley of ice. It's at 6,000 meters. You've got 7,000 meter peaks on either side of you. And I was that knackered that day. I was having a really, really bad day that I didn't feel the earthquake. I didn't actually feel the ground shaking because I was on my own at this point in the fog. I just remember hearing this massive kind of booming crack, which was the sound of ice breaking off the mountain. And then that was an avalanche coming straight towards us. So at that point, panic set in. It's like, okay, I need to get out of here quick. you trying to walk at the altitude is hard enough. You know, you're higher than the top of Kilimanjaro now. You know, and trying to run, you just feel this sort of feel your heart pounding through to the floor as this panic takes over, and all the time this noise is getting louder and faster, and we can't quite see where it's coming from. And then after a while, it kind of went very quiet, and I thought, oh, I must be safe. You know, that must be it. And then it just hit me with this whack, this snow cannon, knocked me off my feet, suffocating, freezing cold air, deafening blast of wind. There's this big blast of powder just came straight through. And, you know, I could only assume the worst. And for the first time in my life at 19, I was thinking, genuinely, this is it. You know, this is game over. And it's that sickening feeling of fear and helplessness that there is nothing I can do about this.
Did you have a moment, Alex, where everything sort of went sterile and white, and you get that kind of metallic taste in your mouth, and you think, "Oh my God, I never thought it would happen to me, and it's going to happen." That
it was like that, I think, and I don't want to take away from people that have had, you know, very, very, very close near-death experiences, but I think it was the closest thing I've never felt anything like it. At that momentary kind of, it's almost as if you're flipping into a different perspective, and the world's changing around you, and that sickening, overwhelming loss of control. And it was a split second. You know, I don't know how long this thing lasted, but it was that genuine feeling of, yeah, game over.
Yeah.
And it's hard to describe, very hard to describe, but luckily it wasn't a proper avalanche as such. It was a blast of powder. But when you hear something like that coming at you, you know, and unfortunately it did pass. You know, we just got this big blast of powder. We were covered in snow. The ropes were buried, but I'm still here. You know, straight away I shooed my teammates behind me were dead because I couldn't get them on the radio. I just had to get myself to safety. You know, there was nothing I could do for them with all these ropes and everything gone and crevasses. So I got to Camp 1 and found two of my teammates, you know, both a lot older, a lot tougher than me, you know, shaking. One of their glasses had just shattered with the force of the wind that hit us. And that's when it really sunk in, really, as to what we'd just been through. We were trapped at Camp 1 then for 2 days on the mountain. The route to base camp had gone. We're told we'd be there for a week. You know, we've got food for a day, maybe 2 at most. And every half an hour, you've got aftershocks, avalanching us from both sides. So that was interesting.
Alex, I'm just trying to. Which was the incident then where a massive wave, if we can call it, of snow washed over the base camp, and a lot of people got smashed up? I think there were many deaths.
At the same time.
Was it this
basically
one?
The earthquake that had triggered this, you know, this avalanche into the ice, into the Western Cwm where we were, luckily it was pretty benign, but the same earthquake triggered a massive avalanche into base camp down below, which was basically falling rock and ice from Pomori, which is one of the peaks just above base camp. And base camp's never really been hit by a proper avalanche before because of where it's situated. This was how big it was. And people never expected or even saw it till the very last second because the fog was so bad that day. And the footage you've probably seen in the news of this tsunami of rock and snow and ice flying everywhere was where the real damage was done. And yeah, sadly 21 people, or possibly 22 people, lost their lives that day, including 3 of our team, sadly. You know, to think that actually we've been in the safest place of all.
Well, and you say your team members behind you on the rope were missing. Was that the 3 or?
They were luckily fine. That was my leader Tim and teammate Ellis, and they were just about 10 minutes behind. But they were, you know, they arrived to our relief quite shortly afterwards. But it was the people down at base camp, staff, and you know, to think that we'd only left base camp ourselves, you know, at 5 o'clock that morning.
So did you have to go down and dig them out, or were there dead bodies everywhere? I mean, I'm assuming there was.
base camp, I'm told, and from what I've seen, was a bit like a bomb blast, a bit like a plane crash. And even when we got down 2 days later, it was still very much a plane crash. But the dead and the injured had already been moved by this point. Fortunate, really, for us that we escaped seeing that. But I know people that were at base camp had to deal with that, and there was a lot of the remnants of that were still around, and yeah, pretty unpleasant. But luckily, because we were trapped in the mountain for 2 days, it all been cleared, really.
It's interesting, Alex, because I would go there and I would be expecting that is a possibility that could happen. Maybe not so much base camp, because as you said, it's not really happened in known history. But I would be expecting, something very bad could happen. And indeed, I've been on expeditions where people, a person lost their life. But I would imagine for some people, I don't think they can perceive that could happen, and so when it does, it's so much more of a shock.
Really interesting point, and you certainly see how different people responded to it. Some of our people in our team were ex-military, and they were, most of them kept a much clearer head. They were much able to respond and take on that leadership role. Some people completely flipped. I mean, I went into shock. I didn't necessarily flip, but I was just numb. I just lay there in my tent for 2 days, not really taking care of myself. Whereas some people that were always sort of planning too far ahead, the ones that were always asking things like, am I fit enough yet? Or are we going to, what's going to happen on summit day? Always thinking a bit too far ahead of themselves. They were the ones that crumbled because they're almost always anticipating. I think one of the key skills in the mountains and endurance is being able to take things one day at a time. And I think that nature serves people well. But typically, I mean, when you go into something like Everest, with any challenge, you've got to, you have an appreciation for risk. But the thing was, this was unprecedented. This shouldn't have happened. If anybody, we should have been the ones in the danger zone. And that is, I think, is a good metaphor for life, that actually, even staying in our comfort zones can kill us. But ultimately, I think, at the time, everybody responds differently. But I think ultimately, you can't prepare for something like this. And it was actually a friend who'd been in the army. He was in the Royal Engineers. It was him that was the only person who could really help me afterwards, because, there was me feeling guilt, for the people that died. Why them? Why not me? And he was quite harsh on me to sort of say, but look, it wasn't, they wouldn't care if it was you. You've just got to grow from this. You've got to grow from this. And he'd seen some pretty horrific stuff at a young age, and I've seen more at 19 than a lot of people will. I feel grateful for that experience now, because it's taught me what's really important. But ultimately, I think it is interesting seeing how people respond to that in the moment, because you're really tied into so many emotions. And I kind of went into survival mode, until we spent 4 days at base camp walking around trying to help in any way we could. Then we walked out of base camp, so 2 days at base camp and 4 days to walk out. So we didn't put any stress on the helicopters, or that we're obviously trying to help people who are injured. But it wasn't until I got in the airport on the way home that I just broke down. Just trying to deal with that, really.
Yeah, gosh, yes. It's interesting. I went to a festival in Portugal with two mates, and one of them was a very old friend of mine, guy I drove to India and back with, and he drowned like on our first night at this festival. We hadn't even got into the festival. We were camping, waiting to go in, and he must have decided to go for a swim, and he basically wasn't a very good swimmer. And so I went, when we got noticed something was wrong, I had to walk down to the lake to see if it's our mate, because well, to see if it was our mate, and it was. So we're on holiday. It's almost comical. We got a dead body on our hands, and then you've just got to deal with it, right? There's no guidebook. So I was just I just remained detached, It's
you have to detach yourself, and I don't want to be an expert, and I know people that have dealt with far, far worse things, and you do have to detach yourself. And I think that was the advice my friend gave me at the time, is you've just got to grow from this and use it to do good, and this is now a driver for me, and it's been almost a mental health challenge, is that I now feel this pressure to contribute, to make the most of what I have. And I was already doing that to an extent. I was already following my dreams in life, and trying to be the best I could be, but actually the sense of I need to serve a purpose, because I shouldn't be here. I know it sounds very, very deep and very morbid, but I think having a sense of purpose, I think, has always been key for me in my, especially mental health. And it's something that I advise to a lot of people, is that, crikey, without purpose, what have we got to get us out of bed in the morning? That event happened to me, and it still comes back to get me now and again. It's always going to be with me, and it's the anniversary this week.
Okay.
And yeah, as I'm sure you found with your own experiences, these things, they change you, they live with you, but we have to somehow use them to find us.
I'm very clinical now, Alex. It's because I've had a lot of hurt and pain to get over in my life, and so now I just don't do it. I literally don't go there. So when my friend, I call him Lee in my work, when Lee died, I just looked at his dead body and thought, right, the first thing coming to mind is this a sign I should stop partying? And I'm like, Chris, what would he have said to that? He'd say, get a grip, man. Grow up, go and have a beer and live your life, But it was interesting that the other guy, who hadn't been Lee hadn't been in the military, but this guy hadn't either. He just went to pieces in almost the worst way you can deal with anything. It's just hysterically crying and wouldn't stop all day long. And when you mentioned the airport, so cut a bit of a story short, but I ended up at Madrid airport in Spain, flying home, and I put my bag on the scales, and the check-in assistant just looked at me and went, and I said, what's wrong? He just said, so he pointed to the I can't remember exactly what he said, but he pointed to the information desk. So I put my rucksack on, walked over to the information desk, and they said, a plane's just crashed on the runway. And in that plane, there was everybody died. It was 167 people. As I'm putting my bag on the scales, there's 167 people basically burning to death in an airplane, just like there. And it pays to be a bit philosophical in life sometimes. So my thoughts were just with them, their families, and I turned around, went and got myself a hotel, and again, I didn't put any emotional investment into it other than just paying my respect to those people and their families. Gosh. So let's move forward, Alex, because you're doing some amazing things. What's it like? I'm just getting into the public speaking arena. I think this COVID thing has kind of put its foot down on that a bit. But is it? How do you deal with the nerves of going on stage in front of hundreds, if not more people?
My biggest audience to date is about 650, but I don't necessarily find it more daunting with more people. It's such a variety, and that's what makes it such a rewarding and interesting job, is that every talk is different, every audience is different. But with time, the nerves have got easier. I mean, I think you've got to have some fear, because if you don't have fear, then there's no respect for the audience, you know, and that comes across, and then you become complacent. There's still an element of fear, but that's what makes it interesting. And when you get into it, when you get in the flow, when you connect with people, it's the most fantastic experience. And I'm very, very grateful to have a chance to do that, and to get to speak to so many people and meet so many inspiring people around the UK and Europe. So yeah, I mean, to be honest, when I got better control of my stamina, I got less nervous, because I knew that I had more control. There was less uncertainty. Before then, I had to be really, really, really rehearsed and properly in the zone to reduce the stamina. But until I get on stage and open my mouth, I have no idea how my speech is going to behave. It's a bit like a naughty child. But now I love it, and I like that with anything, with confidence, with practice, it gets easier.
Did you watch The Office when it was on? It's actually probably quite a few years ago now. It might be before your time, Alex. Ricky Gervais' Office. Oh, it's if you ever get a chance, maybe type into YouTube Ricky Gervais motivational speaking or something.
Nice.
If you haven't seen it, I won't say any more. But to our friends at home watching, some of you might know.
The Office.
He's just the most egotistical, self-conscious life coach there. But do you have a set kind of speech that you've worked on over the years? Did you start with something kind of manageable, and now you flow from, adapt and flow from that?
Yeah, it varies. I mean, when I started off, it was purely by chance. It would have been my worst nightmare to be a professional speaker with a stammer. But I got the opportunity to speak to a school about the Olympic torch, which, I was fortunately involved with in 2012. And it was that case of, right, I've got an opportunity. I'm scaring the hell out of me. I don't want to do it. But I've realized just what happened when I did challenge myself and take these opportunities. And so I kind of couldn't say no. And then I found it amazingly easier than I expected to speak to 210 kids. And I got a buzz out of it. And I realized, actually, I could do this. And the feedback I got from the kids, everything just made me realize, actually, I've got to do this. I've got to give something back. But then that evolved, and then I started to actually approach more speaking gigs. I loved the buzz and the confidence boost it gave me. And then I got an opportunity to speak for a business club. Now, this was a fairly prestigious club, but it was in return for a charity contribution and a donation to the cost of my trip. So obviously I kind of had to say yes. But that was when I met my first speaking mentor, John, and he coached me on the very basics and a bit of a fast track course into speaking. And I spoke to 100 people in this business club who are used to listening to the pros of round vines and things, and I got a standing ovation, and it was just the most magical feeling. And so that's your point. When I started off, it was a case of doing it because I had to, and it was a bit of a journey through where I started and what's brought me there. But like anything, you get better with practice and learn from feedback, most importantly, good and bad, a lot of bad. And then I got paid for my first talk. And then there's this mindset shift about, people pay me to do this. This is cool. I was eventually able to stop washing pots and working in hotels and pubs and restaurants, and along with sponsorship and ambassador roles, I could do this, more and more. And now it's a big part of the day. It's a big part of my day job. But to do that, to stay relevant, to be able to appeal to businesses, you've got to be very specific and concise, and you've got to present very well. So typically I have to tailor my adventures and my stories to businesses and to schools and their messages they want to hear and what's beneficial in the business environment. So I'm always tweaking it. I always use a script. I always prepare for every talk. But it's never the same. And because every talk, every business is different. And I'm constantly learning, constantly doing new challenges. And as Ralph Fiennes said, you have to do expeditions to get the stories to pay the bills. And it's secondary for me. I love sharing the stories, and the feedback that I get is what inspires me to keep on doing it.
He sent me He sent me his book the other day, a signed copy of his book, which was
Oh wow, yeah,
yeah,
a big inspiration for all of us, and yeah,
yeah.
proof that we can be doing these things for years to come.
And I went to my girlfriend very kindly bought me tickets to see him for my 50th birthday. So we saw him not just the other week actually, and incredibly funny, incredibly dry public
Dry, yeah.
speaker. It was just brilliant to listen to. I don't know if that's the same speech he always gives, but it was so funny and so
Yeah.
humble.
I met him once at Chester Literature Festival, and he was very dry, as you say. And I think people like that, they've got so many stories to choose from. That was the challenge I've had, is that as I've done more stuff, I've got the same time, and I keep kind of reverting back to the same stories, because if they work, don't change it.
Yeah.
It is difficult.
What's the what? Did you say you got negative feedback?
Well, luckily not much, at least not directly, but being very much a perfectionist, it was feedback that I picked up on myself, and I look back at some of my early talks and cringe, like I'm sure we all would. But yeah, I mean, just constantly never settling for good enough, and asking for feedback, eventually paying for coaching and mentoring and learning, and and as a result of that, you're able to get busier and speak to more people.
And tell us about your more recent challenges then. This you had the 3 Peaks challenge that I read about, and then you had this running up every single
County top. Where to start with? Quite a few. I mean, after Everest, just briefly, I went to try and climb Choyu, which is the 6th highest peak in the world in Tibet. That was kind of part of a plan to go back to Everest one day, but then I got to Camp 2, 7,000 meters, and then got ill. Had to abandon that summit attempt. And that's when I had a very much a light bulb moment shift. And that's when I went on to, I got back into running again, because I'd not ran for years and years because of the injury risk. And basically after a bad case of anxiety and depression and an eating disorder after an injury, I didn't want to risk going back there. So I got back into running again, and then decided to stay close to home. So 2017 did climb the UK, which was my kind of biggest challenge to date, really, which was climbing to the highest point of all the 100 counties in the UK, cycling, walking, running, kayaking, about 5,000 miles in 72 days, which was fundraising for Young Minds, which is the youth mental health charity. Basically, it took so long to get the help I needed that I wanted to raise awareness of that. Frankly, I could cycle around the UK faster than I could get an appointment on the NHS. So that's where that challenge came from. And yeah, that was an amazing journey. We have so much to enjoy in our home soil that most of us don't appreciate.
Yeah. Would you go back to Everest?
The key question. I can never say never. I'm too young to say never, but I think the journey, which is often a bit people forget about, the journey has opened up so many other doors in my life and helped me to realize what my real passion is and what's really important. And there was something that obviously drove me to Everest in the first place. And there is still that bit of a goosebumpy feeling in there sometimes. But younger people tend to be worse at altitude. And I would wait till I'm a bit older, I think, to give me the best chance of success. But also, as you mentioned before, the fundraising, the commitment. Everest has almost given me so much else in terms of speaking and writing and at my charity, Mind Over Mountains, and other challenges that I realised that I don't really need it right now, and that I don't want it enough at the moment to be willing to give it 100%. You've got to want that. You've got to be willing to take that risk.
Yeah.
There's not so much the fear of what could happen. There's no fear of, a bad thing could happen again, because we know how uncertain life is. It's more a case of not wanting to get enough at the moment. So we'll see.
I'll put all your links, Alex, by the way, below the YouTube video for anybody listening.
Cool,
can you tell us what's the mission what's the mission of your charity?
So it's a fairly new project, actually, because in the past, all my challenges have been fundraising for a variety of causes. But I've certainly found that, the outdoors and exercise have been the best medication that I've tried. I've often felt that we need purpose, not pills. And after after Everest, after that, kind of trauma of what happened there, it was running and charity work that really helped me to find a way through. And so I wanted other people to find those benefits. Basically, Mind Over Mountains is about, it's to restore mental health through outdoor experiences and building the resilience to stay mentally well. We do feel that being outside and being active on a regular basis is the most powerful tool that we have. And especially in these very uncertain times, I feel so grateful that I can get out and run still and cycle. And essentially, we want to help more people access that. So we're currently set up as a CIC, community interest company, but we're still due to get our charity number very soon. And yeah, we really hope that we can get more people involved. And just briefly, I mentioned my next challenge, which was meant to be happening in about 2 weeks' time, which I mentioned is the 3 Peaks. So I know we spoke before, about running a marathons and being rubbish in the gym, but loving that kind of human-powered adventure. And my plan is to run the 3 Peaks. So the national 3 Peaks, people know it, Ben Nevis, Scafell Pike and Snowdon, but actually running the entire distance between them. And I was trying to break the record for doing that unsupported. So running about 450 miles. Now, obviously, that challenge can't go ahead just yet, but as soon as it can, it will do. And that'll be raising money for Mind Over Mountains as well. So I'd love people to obviously follow me on that.
Wow, well, the best. Well, I don't want to wish you luck because I know you're going to smash it, and that's where your mindset is.
I've had an injury recently, which in some ways is another positive to the challenge being delayed, as I've got more time to prepare, and I couldn't join in, but they were doing some mad stuff like that, and it just goes to show that whatever happens, we can all muck in and make a difference. And been recently reading a really, a really good book by David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me, a US SEAL, and I love reading about his process through the application and the training. And it sounds brutal, but I'd like to think that the outdoors has given me a similar kind of resilience. I'd love to test myself on something like that, because although I might not have the physical strength, I think our minds are capable of so much more, and I think it's really interesting to test that.
I listened to his book when I did a quadruple Ironman for my 50th birthday.
As you do.
Yeah, well, I sorry to the people that have heard this story before, but there's always people that haven't. I did my first triathlon. It was an Olympic distance triathlon, and I came last. In fact, my son was sat at the finish line going, "Where's Daddy?" I was so rubbish, particularly on the bike. Everybody flew past me, and so I thought, what should I do next then? Okay, I'll do a quadruple Ironman, and I'll do it in 8 weeks' time on my 50th birthday. So I had 8 weeks to go from being pretty much the country's worst triathlete. They gave me a finisher's medal, but I didn't get a time. I was too rubbish. So I went from there to doing a quadruple Ironman in 4 weeks, just to show people what you can do if you put your mind to it and you believe in yourself.
Definitely.
That was a 9.5 mile swim, 450 miles on the bike, immediately followed by a 108 mile run. There was a point to telling you this story, and I think maybe I've forgotten. Forgotten what it was, but oh well. Sorry, what was the last thing you said, Alex? You triggered me to tell you this.
Just about reading the book by David Goggins and.
Sorry. Yes, of course. Yeah. So I jumped in the swimming pool and I'd invested in these waterproof earphones, and I bought this waterproof pouch for my phone, and the idea was I could keep the tracker going on the phone, so I could measure I ended up having to do it in a Lido pool, so it's a cold saltwater swimming pool, and I put the phone in this waterproof pouch. I put the earphones in. I put on my tracker to measure the distance, and I played David Goggins. Dived in the water, and it didn't work. so it didn't measure the distance, nor did it play David Goggins, which was which wasn't a good start. But when I got to the bike, then I listened to his whole book on the bike, and again, for young people who are interested in mindset, David Goggins, You Can't Hurt Me. That was a good one. Tell us about your own book, Alex.
Well, nothing to his standard, but I've written 2 books now. I've got Icefall, which is my first one. Icefall there. I'm very proud to have that endorsed by Bear Grylls himself. And that's about my journey to Everest from nowhere, to what happened, and then leaving kind of to what's next at the end of 2015. And then another peak came out last year, and that was talking about my county top challenge around the UK, sharing the people, the places, and the stories. But also it was a bit of a mental health, self-help type book, not written in that style, but being really honest and open about my struggles and how the outdoors has helped me through that. And I hope for giving people some practical things that they can do as well, close to home, to get other men talking about it. So those books have been a really enjoyable experience. I've always enjoyed writing, and I've had a lot of feedback that people enjoy reading them. So I'm currently using this lockdown time to work on a number 3. But if anybody does want to obviously read more about my story and my experiences, both books are available signed via my website as well.
Okay, I'll put a link for your website below.
Yes,
and Alex, you're obviously a very humble man, so I'm going to have to needle out of you. You had some award of one of these of the year awards. Was it Achiever of the Year or something? Did I see?
You're probably thinking of Pride of Britain award.
That's the words that should have been in my forgetful memory.
I can't really be humble about just kind of actually blurting out all Pride of Britain award. It was the Granada Reports, so the Northwest Region fundraiser of the year back in 2017 for the Climb the UK Challenge. So amazing recognition. I mean, it was always a life dream that one day I might get to go there, but it was never a conscious goal. It was one of those things that I'd have to really earn it, and I never expected it at 2017. The biggest honour, and just to get in that room of so many inspiring people was just phenomenal. To have Prince Harry walking past you as if you're in the pub, and Ozzy Osbourne was there to everybody you can think of in entertainment. But it was, the biggest honour really, and I'll never forget it.
Wow, you thoroughly deserved it, mate. That's
There's more challenges to come, so we'll see what happens. But I think now Mine Over Mountains is hopefully a way of creating a legacy that lasts, and really helps people to get the same tools that I found in the outdoors. I really think that it can help people bring them back together, especially after what we're facing now. People will need it more than ever. Yeah.
Well, I should also add that just by coming on my podcast, Alex, you're going to help people.
I hope so.
Especially with what the great advice and also the story that you've told us today. So I will say goodbye. I truly hope we can do something at some stage in the future. If you don't mind slowing down for this old man.
It's all it's all the slow game. The important thing is finishing it.
Of course it is. So massive respect to you, Alex. Thank you ever so much. To our friends at home, thank you for watching another edition of the Bought the T-Shirt podcast. Big love to you and your families. Look after yourselves, and I will see you all soon. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.